Hey, just a quick side note to let you know that I recently published my own story, Who Am I Really? An adoptee memoir. You can find it on Amazon, and I hope to have an audio version released very soon. I hope you'll add my story to your reading or listening list. Okay, here's the show.
One thing that I told her the first time we met, I told her it was important for me, and I told her I don't even know if this is important to you, but I just want to tell you that I love you and I forgive you, and I needed to tell her that out loud. Maybe just for me, I don't know, but I needed to, because I definitely had a resentment for a long time, so I needed to let her off the hook, so to speak.
Who am I?
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 This is Who Am I Really? A podcast about adoptees that have located and connected with their biological family members. I'm Damon Davis, and on today's show is James. He called me from right up the road in Laurel, Maryland. In James's story, you'll hear his struggle to find himself and an identity as a youth in a family that didn't look like him. It took him years to find his voice after a bitter divorce left him and his adopted siblings abused. Thankfully, James's wife, an excellent investigator, found his birth parents and helped initiate meaningful reunions that allowed James to express forgiveness and to find belonging. This is James's journey. So it turns out, James and I have only a few degrees of separation. He works for one of my dad's friends, Knowlton Atterbury. If you read my memoir, Knowlton's name might sound familiar. It was Knowlton's house we stopped by the day I was adopted, where my dad put me on the ground and with pride watched me crawl around Knowlton's home. Anyway, back to James. James was born in San Francisco, California. He describes himself as biracial, and he was adopted by a white family. He has an older brother and sister who are also white and also adopted. James said life started off fantastic. They lived in a picturesque community in Berkeley, and in his early childhood, the racial makeup of their home didn't matter much to him at all. They were just his family, but then things changed dramatically.
My parents got divorced when I was 7, and it was pretty traumatic, and it threw the family into chaos. And there was some abuse that went on, and there was just some, it just wasn't a good scene. We suddenly didn't have any money, and just things got pretty bad.
And do you mind me asking, in terms of the abuse that happened in the family, was that towards the children or exclusively towards your mother, or what?
It was towards us from our mom. She, there's some physical abuse and some just emotional stuff. It was just kind of damaging. She wasn't really, I don't think, in a good place to be a single mom with, struggling, and it's just a bad scene.
It's James's recollection that his adoptive mother's abuse began after the divorce, but he admits he was 7 years old, in first grade, and his memory might be a little incorrect. James described the next 5 years as chaos.
Because of what was going on in the home, Child Protective Services came, and they actually removed my brother when he was 12, and I was 10. So he was removed from the home. He never came back to live with us. He went through the foster care system, and we always stayed in touch, but he never lived in the home again.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of gives you an idea of, how serious it was.
This was during her single parenting period?
Yes. Yep. It was. Yep. Like right in the middle of it. It was pretty.
He was the middle child, so he was removed and the two of you were not. I find that interesting.
Mm-hmm. That they let us stay. I mean, I kind of was hoping they'd take me out too.
Really?
I thought he was the big winner, I mean, that was from the perspective of a 10-year-old, but he probably didn't think that. But Chris, so I took some psych courses in college, and sometimes they label the birth order, and a lot of times the middle child is labeled the scapegoat, and he was definitely the scapegoat. He caught the worst of it. I mean, he caught hell.
Chris ran away a lot, often found by the police. An investigation into their family life called for his removal, but the other children remained. James said he never asked why, but at first glance, you could see how the squeaky wheel got the oil. A runaway child might be the one to be removed before others, even though everyone was in danger. When James was in 6th grade, his mother remarried. Their stepfather was a nice guy, a college professor, and their combined income alleviated some financial pressure in the house. But then he started physically abusing their mother. All of these tumultuous situations were wreaking havoc on James's identity. He started to recognize the differences between himself and those around him.
That's when I started to get into the identity stuff. Like, oh, wait a minute, I'm a little different here. That compounded with the sort of the emotional stuff that was, the constant sort of sarcasm and hostility that was in the house. That kind of worked to kind of devastate my self-esteem. So that's kind of where I was going.
I asked James to give some examples of exactly how he started to feel different.
Yeah, I mean, like back to school nights, like everybody else's parents kind of matched, and I didn't, I was a person of color, I was biracial and had a big afro, and this is like very obvious. And my mom was white, and she was red hair and very fair skinned, and so it made me self-conscious in that regard. I thought people were judging me, and it's funny because I found out later that in Berkeley at that time, there was a lot of us mixed kids who were adopted by white people. It was just like a whole lot. So, but I had no idea that this wasn't all that abnormal. I felt very outside of the norm. And then with the stuff that was going on at home, I just felt ashamed. And like I said, I lost my voice. I didn't want to speak up, and the only outlet I had was sports. I played a lot of sports, and that was good. I mean, that's how I, achieved, made friends and got a sense of fulfillment and achievement and that stuff. But other than that, I felt like a pariah. So that's the effect it had on me.
Tell me more about, you used the words, I lost my voice. What does that mean?
Well, for me, it means that I felt my opinion didn't matter, and that if I formed an opinion, it wasn't going to be heard anyway if I did voice it. I guess I felt unheard. It might be just not heard, and it just stayed with me through everything else, through school, through my early work career, just through everything. I just didn't figure that my voice needed to be heard from.
It didn't matter, it sounds like you felt.
Exactly. It didn't matter, and I was probably wrong.
James said it wasn't until his 40s, and when he had established the career he has now, that he finally learned to speak up and let his voice be heard. The natural ability to voice his own opinion, which comes naturally to many of us, requires an extra boldness for James. His self-esteem had been demolished in his youth. Back then, the playground and sports were his outlet. He would go outside to play and stay out there for hours. But he recalls that the camaraderie that the other children had while socializing after the games were over didn't come naturally to him. When the others were chit-chatting, he was still out on the court practicing by himself. He said he usually only had one friend at a time.
Like I would have close friends, like one close friend, and then I would kind of, it's kind of weird, but I would kind of rotate them, So I'd like have a good friend, and then after a while, I kind of move over to another good friend, and I never really had like a group it was always like one person I would latch on to, and we would just be best friends for a while. Then I'd have another best friend, it's just kind of the way it went for me.
That is really interesting. So, it sounds like you were having trust issues with more than one person. Like you, the people in your life, your brother was taken away, your mom was, mentally abusive, physically abusive. So the trust that if you had it before you were 7 was demolished again by the time this all occurred after divorce. It sounds like you really had some challenges in trying to develop these interpersonal relationships now, because all of the closest ones that you had up until that point were destroyed or taken away, I could see how you would only begin to be able to take in one person at a time.
Yeah. I mean, the message I got was if you love somebody or opened up and were vulnerable, they either hurt you or they left. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the message I had received at that point. So it wasn't wise to put myself in that position. So, yeah.
James's sister left their home when she was 16 years old. She was aggressive and rebellious and acted out in a lot of ways against their mother. The departures in his life were a pattern, so he developed a lot of trust issues. James said part of the paradox of his upbringing was he grew up in a really nice community, but the chaos inside their home didn't match the tranquility of the outside environment. All of his friends in the neighborhood had stuff, but his family was struggling. As background, he told me his mother inherited some money when her mother passed away, before he was born, so when their money ran out, the house became a source of resentment for the kids. They wanted to sell the house, move to a more affordable place, but their mother refused. The home became an anchor for the family, and their living situation was a source of shame for James. He said his mother died in that house in 2011 when he was 42 years old. In hindsight, he's grateful for the glimpse he got into disparities in people's socioeconomic status. Turning to James's desire to search, he said that after a while, he kind of resented the fact that he didn't look like his family. Keep in mind, he's a brown-skinned, interracial child with woolly hair, and his mother was a fair-skinned, red-haired woman.
I think I developed a resentment about it because it just was one more thing that didn't seem fair in life. So it was like, okay, so here's another thing I have to deal with. You know, at least everybody else kind of matches their parents and knows where they come from and that type of thing. I not only live in a chaotic, crazy situation, but, you know, I'm not even blood related to these people. You know what I mean? So it's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're my family. I mean, to this day, I mean, you know how it is. You're born and raised, basically born and raised in a family. That's your family. But, you know, there's always that kind of hole in you that's like, okay, wait a minute, where do I come from? You know? And so, and then the added component of not being of the same nationality, we couldn't even fake it, you know? So there was that. So I started trying to figure out, like, you know, I wonder who my dad is. Like, that was really important to me because that's the black side of me. And I kind of always identified with that. And I was just like, who's my dad? I remember growing up in the 70s, Walt Frazier was this great point guard for the Knicks. And I said, I used to fantasize that he was my dad, you know, and he was going to pull up in a limousine one day and take me to New York, and I was just going to, you know, live with him. And just the fantasies that kids have, you know.
James and his mother went to the adoption agency to get his non-identifying information. He learned a little bit about what his biological parents looked like and that he had an older biological brother on his mother's side of the family. That effort wasn't really a search, just an information gathering mission. He kept that information close by for years. At 35 years old, in 2004, James initiated a search with a San Diego-based search angel named Judy, who runs an online adoption registry called findmyfamily.org. She used James's birthday and the hospital he was born in to narrow their search down to under 10 possible names for his birth mother. But the internet wasn't the robust search resource that it is today, so the search for James's birth mother stalled. Finally, in 2017, James's wife, Marshall, took the information online and just dug in. Like a detective, she put together the ages, relationship, and details on the California Birth Index to locate the one person with the last name of one of the women in the search group, who was born in the same year as his birth mother, based on the non-identifying information.
At that point, she was able to go on the internet and find her. And she's like, okay, this is your mom, you know?
Wow. What was that like for you? Like, were you with her during the search, or how did she tell you the news?
Yeah, I was with her, but I wasn't as invested because, I don't know, I just didn't want to get my hopes up. You know, I had already kind of put this in the impossible box. And
right.
My only prayer was that I might get a picture one day of somebody I was related to. That was like kind of what I was asking God for at that point. I just want to see a picture. I never thought we'd actually find the people. I mean, that's a needle in the haystack, and that stuff doesn't happen for me,
Right, right. Why would you hold hope for something like this? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want to get so when she found her, I was like, okay, well, maybe. I just didn't want to get my hopes up.
Shortly thereafter, Marshall found James's birth father online too. But they didn't want to stalk these people, so they turned back to Judy to get advice as to what to do next, based on her experience in Reunion. Judy offered to reach out as a genealogist with the introductory information that she had found someone that was related to his birth mother. The innocuous message she left didn't really hit home with his birth mother when she first received it. When she got the message from Judy, she thought it sounded interesting, but not so pressing that she wanted to circle back immediately.
Now, meanwhile, we're sitting on pins and needles, right? I mean, we're like, every day is, okay, is this going to be the day?
James and Marshall were getting antsy and were about to simply reach out to the woman themselves. Judy asked if she could have one more crack at it, presenting a more succinct and direct message, making it clearer that the person she was working with was someone who was looking for their biological family, and he really thought they might be related.
And that's when my mom says that, the light just went on. She's like, oh my God, she had that moment of clarity, and it was just, it was a miracle for her too, and she's just like, oh, I know what this is, and there was no denying. It was very fortunate. It went very well. I know these things can go different ways, but I couldn't have asked for a better outcome.
Judy brokered the introductions, providing each the other's phone numbers. James finally got the chance to call his birth mother.
We just had a great conversation. My mom is really cool. She's a very nice, sweet lady. And she just said she thought about me every day. It was the hardest decision she ever made. There's a whole backstory. I mean, the backstory is really very interesting and cool. The first call was just like, wow, how are you? Like, what do you really say? It was just kind of like, wow, okay, you're my mom, and it's like, wow, son, I just, I thought about you every day. It was just kind of a sweet conversation.
James admitted that he thought he knew his birth father's name, and without even saying it, his birth mother confirmed the man's identity, Robert. She even used his nickname. Before that conversation, Marshall had found James's birth father's obituary and seen a picture of his tombstone at a Quantico, Virginia cemetery with that nickname on it. The night she found his birth mother's name, she was up all night as one clue led to another. She found pictures of the man and James's half-brother, and their resemblance was undeniable. While James was initiating contact with his birth mother, Marshall was also reaching out to his brother. She found out where he was employed through his Facebook page and called him at work, where she was unexpectedly forwarded to his voicemail. Marshall nearly hung up because she hadn't rehearsed what she was going to say, and the whole thing was just crazy. But she left a message. 45 minutes later, James's brother called Marshall back. She said a quick prayer before she answered the phone, then shared the story of her husband recently finding his birth mother. Here's Marshall.
And I said, the thing is, I said, I believe his dad is your father. And he was completely silent. He was not saying, I was waiting for him to cuss me out. He wasn't saying anything. He was very friendly, just listening. He asked a few questions and he said, well, I don't think this could be true because my dad was married and he just kind of went into some detail why it wasn't possible that it could be his dad. And then he said, well, what's your husband's name? And I gave it to him. And he looked him up on Facebook while we're speaking. And he knew because they look exactly alike.
Wow.
And he just was like, oh, he said it. He's like, oh, my God. And the conversation just shifted.
Suddenly, James's brother wanted to know more about him. He wanted to hear about his upbringing and just more about James. James's brother decided he wanted to talk to their uncle, James's father's brother. It was likely that he had historical knowledge from decades ago. He called back to say the uncle remembered the relationship with James's biological mother, and he recalled hearing about the pregnancy situation. All of this was happening so fast, I had to wonder how James was feeling as it all unfolded. What are you thinking, given that you had basically given up on all of this?
Right. So I had to go through layers of disbelief and accept that this was actually happening. So the initial feeling, of course, is joy and relief and all that, but it's kind of tempered by years and years and years of not wanting to, have hope, and you know what I mean? So it's like all that stuff has to kind of break through the layers of protection I put on around this, if you know what I mean. So it was all very surreal. But I will say that almost immediately I felt like a hole being filled. You know what I mean? Like spiritually and emotionally, I felt it was a filling. That's the only way I can really describe it, being filled.
That's amazing.
Where there's always been a hole. And that was immediate. That was immediate. And then the joy and the acceptance kind of had to work its way through, that kind of wall of protection I've put around hoping that this would ever happen. And so I'm still processing this. It's been a year and a half, and I'm still processing. My mom says the same thing. Like, we're still processing. Yeah, but I've just been very fortunate with this outcome and how everybody's responded.
The first biological family member James met was his paternal brother. He and his family were traveling to Washington, D.C., so they met up. A big group of them had brunch, and they went to the National African American Museum of History and Culture.
And we took a picture. It's funny. We kind of have the same sort of pose, and it's not planned. It's just, those can't help it type things that I guess kind of genetically kind of happen. It's funny.
Yeah,
we were walking, and my wife and his wife said, "What?" They were watching us walk, and they're like, "You guys are walking in lockstep." We're like,
that's
so
cool.
I love stuff like that. It just gives me a sense of belonging and connection that I've never had.
And may I ask, your brother's black?
Yeah.
How was it to then be amongst black people that you look like, having not been around a family that you looked like before?
Man, you nailed it. I mean, that was awesome. That was awesome to be around black folks that I'm actually related to, that I actually look like. That, man, I mean, that just a sense of completion, a sense of coming home, a sense of identity that I've never had. It was just awesome. It was fantastic. It was just, I just thank God every day for that. It was amazing.
That's really interesting.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'll bet that did feel like a coming home. During that same visit, James met his paternal sister, more than 10 years older than himself. They had lunch and talked, but their connection has been limited to that. In January of 2018, James's mother flew from Boise, Idaho to BWI in Baltimore.
So I met her. I hugged her for the first time. I was 48 years old, and I hugged my mom for the first time in BWI airport, and my wife videotaped it too.
Is that right? That's incredible.
Yeah.
What was that like to meet her for the first time?
It was, I was expecting sort of this avalanche of emotions, and I didn't have that. It was almost like a relief. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, that this is my mom. I was just extremely happy and grateful to finally meet her. But I didn't have this sort of overwhelming, like I didn't collapse or, you know what I mean? Like there wasn't anything like that, but it was just a really sweet sort of relief to finally connect with my mother, and she just came and visited on Mother's Day. So I think it was our third time, because I've been out to Idaho since then as well. And I think this time was the most I've felt actually connected to her, So it's had to grow. It's been a process. And I wanted it. I don't want to feel any fake emotion. I don't want to fake anything. You know what I mean? I don't want to pretend that there was something that wasn't there. I wanted to really genuinely feel everything. And it's been a process,
Yeah.
But one thing that that I told her the first time we met. I told her it was important for me, and I told her, I don't even know if this is important to you, but I just want to tell you that I love you and I forgive you, and I needed to tell her that out loud. Maybe just for me, I don't know, but I needed to, because I definitely had a resentment for a long time. So I needed to let her off the hook, so to speak. So
you needed it.
That was awesome.
It does sound like you needed it for both of you, for her and for yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you had all those layers built up over time, I'm sure one of them was directly related to her and you specifically. And it sounds like you needed to sort of just break that wall right down so that you guys could go forward.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
How did she receive your words?
She cried a little bit, just out of, I don't know, just out of love, and I don't think that she suffers from a whole lot of guilt or anything. She didn't, and that's good. I don't want her to, I never wanted her to, but she just kind of teared up a little, and we hugged, and she thanked me, and so it was well received.
James's birth mother told him the story of meeting his biological father in the D.C. area. That was a bit of a surprise to him because he had it in his mind he was conceived where he grew up, in the San Francisco Bay Area. She fell in love with a guy who had money and enjoyed the nightlife. But the whole time, James's dad was a bit of a gangster and a hustler, but she didn't know it. When she got pregnant, she had to go down to Lorton, Virginia, where he was in jail, to deliver the news.
When she went to go tell him that she was pregnant, she noticed another name on the visitor's log, so she asked, "Hey, who is this?" So that's when he told her that he was actually married the whole time. And, like my wife told you, my brother, my sister, I have another brother, as well from that marriage. So the whole time he had been married, and, that really devastated her, broke her heart. So she fled, her words, she fled to San Francisco. And this is obviously summer of 68. Cause I was born February 69, and, she went to San Francisco and had me, and she decided that it was going to be very difficult for a lot of reasons. One of them is that my grandfather, she's from California, so it was easy for her to go back to California. She went back to San Francisco, but my grandfather, he was a JAG. He was a Judge Advocate General in the Marines. And unfortunately, though, he was from deep South Texas somewhere, and he was a racist. There's no real other way to put it. From all accounts, he was a pretty nice guy. He was all right guy in all other aspects, but he was not, he was racist. And it's kind of everybody, that's kind of how they were from deep South Texas, from his generation. It's just culturally, that's who he was. Right. And so she felt that bringing in this brown baby into the equation, into the family, there wasn't going to be any support. It was going to be very difficult.
James's birth mother went on to say that she was already struggling with his older brother as a single mother at the time. So her hope was to give James a better opportunity in life with a different family. James said his grandfather had taken in his maternal brother while his birth mother was pregnant with him. So his grandfather knew that his daughter had a son, but James thinks it's unlikely he knew about his mixed race.
It was the hardest decision she ever made. When she handed me over, she was crying. I mean, she didn't make the decision lightly, but she thought it was going to be best all the way around to give me a shot, at a better beginning.
Unbelievable. Yeah. How was it for you to hear this story about how you came to be, that your father was married, a bit of a gangster, infidelity, but it sounds like they liked each other. I mean, there's a lot there. It doesn't sound like you were conceived out of some love, because it sounds like they hung out and had fun. How did you receive this whole story?
I mean, I think I received it somewhat objectively, I just really wanted to know the backstory, and it also just gave me another sense of completion. Like now I know the story, you know what I mean? Like, I think it was good that I came to know this sort of at this age and where I am in my process, that I'm able to kind of just receive the information and, you know, kind of objectively. And I don't know. I just felt like, okay, now I finally know, you know, and it was good to know that they were in love. I mean, that was very clear. You know, they were, this wasn't a one night stand. This wasn't, you know, it was what it was. I mean, unfortunately it was a result of infidelity, and, you know, there's some things that obviously aren't the greatest of situations, but you know, it all kind of made sense. You know, it all kind of, all the blocks kind of fell into place. Like, okay, well, that makes sense.
James told me that forgiveness has been something he's had to work up to, acknowledging all that has transpired to bring him to this point.
I've had to do a lot of the work, you know, around forgiveness and around forgiving her. You know, I have a mentor who's worked with me around that stuff, because I thought I dealt with it, but I really hadn't. You know how we deal with stuff. All stuff happens. You know, I just need to get over it. You know, that's not really dealing with it.
Right.
So I had to kind of dig deep and do a whole exercise around forgiving her, letting her off the hook, and realizing that people do the best they can. And, you know, it's important to let people off the hook and not to hold on to grudges, because that closes you down. And now, you know, I go around and I do some ministry and some other things. And my message is always forgiveness. It's always, you got to forgive. You got to forgive. And so it was important for me to let her know that wasn't something that I was holding on to. I wasn't holding on to any grudges, and that I knew she did what she did out of love and out of hoping to give me a better chance. So it was important. But my dad, it's funny, she tells me that he wanted her to keep me and to figure it out, you know, and to stay and to have me and let him be my dad and not leave, and just kind of, you know, I guess he would have had to come clean with his wife or just whatever. I mean, I don't know how that was going to work, but he was very adamant, you know, about, no, let's do this.
James speaks with some pride for his birth father, a man he never met, but someone that the family and community seemed to hold in high regard as a caring, patriarchal figure and a funny and loving guy. He admitted that hearing his father's desire to try to keep him in the family and work things out was validating.
You know, so he wanted to give it a try and figure it out, you know, and I think I'm kind of, in a weird way, I'm kind of proud of that.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
Maybe it sounds weird, but
No. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, for a person who's adopted, you sometimes have that question of, why wasn't I, you know, kept and retained in my biological family? And to know that someone, both people actually have said, you know, this was the hardest decision I've ever made. And,
right.
You know, your father wanted to keep you. He wanted to work it out, et cetera, et cetera. Like, those are validating things that make it easier to swallow what transpired afterward, versus just like being tossed aside, as it were. You know, I didn't want you. I wasn't interested. You know, that would have been a different set of feelings. So I can totally understand how you feel validated by, and a sense of pride by that. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's a great word for it. Validation.
Yeah,
that's exactly, that crystallizes it. Yeah.
Awesome, James. This has been really cool, man. I appreciate you taking time to share your story. I liked hearing about your recovery as an adult to a place where you found your voice, and that you found a place that you can also forgive your parents for all that has happened, so that you can move forward, at least with your biological mother, together. That's really cool, man. Congrats.
Absolutely.
All right.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk. You know, it's always good to express this stuff. So thanks for being there.
Yeah, man. Thanks for your openness. Take care, James. All the best. Great meeting you. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Alrighty.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, it's me. James got the details and closure he needed to fill the holes in his life story. In his reunion with his biological mother, he was able to tell her face to face, right from the start, that he forgave her and he had love for her. He further admitted something that I think a lot of adoptees feel about biological parents they don't actually get to meet: a sense of pride for how Robert treated his family, as told by the stories of others. I'm Damon Davis, and I hope you'll find something in James's journey that inspires you. validates your feelings about wanting to search, or motivates you to have the strength along your journey to learn, who am I, really? You can find the show online at whoamireallypodcast.com, where you can sign up for emails to learn more about some of the things I'm brainstorming. I'd really appreciate your support for the show with contributions at patreon.com/WAIReally, paypal.me/Damon Davis, or Venmo at Damon L. Davis. I hope you'll leave a rating for Who Am I Really wherever you get your podcasts so that others can find the podcast too.